deliver them to you. If you're not careful, you might not believe me, but trust me, we do all of these. We have Oberkesi University of Excellence, now called Wakanda One Oberkesi University of Excellence. We also have the Oberkesi Foundation. The Oberkesi Foundation takes care of Ghana Chieftaincy Awards. We do a whole lot of philanthropic works, do donations, and a whole lot more. We also have ADDI in this building, African Diaspora Development Institute. We also have that's the Wakanda City project. And then we also have RAS1 clothing. We have a whole lot more that goes on here. But I just want to say welcome, feel at home, because this is your home, and let's have a wonderful program. The next program after today is next Wednesday. I think that's the 16th of February. Thank you so much, and you're welcome home. All right, so at this juncture, I'd like to introduce Nana Oberkesi to do the libation statement. Nana Oberkesi is the regent of Mori. He's also Apejahim of Asebu traditional area. He's the chairperson for the Wakanda One City of Return, Ghana. He wears a whole lot of hats. Sometimes I wonder how he does it. But let's welcome him with a round of applause. Nana Oberkesi Ampa.
What we are about. Okay, so so as far as possible, I would like all of us to pay attention, to meditate, and then to show respect to what we are about to do. We are coming in with the ancestors. Coming face to face. Shirapo Kwame, the child so your mom was at the safe one, sir. I said, also is a so. We also is a son. And now, so is a son. Ghana was some power to say, so the answer for my son, man, no way. You are pretty similar. You see the battle could give a back. And there, the one, and there, that was Ghana. My outfit in black instrument. And there, I said, every khaki and nano of the poor boy, wasn't poor boy, I was a busy one. And there is one in young. It's an area for one hour. Your front, as a book. Yen paying for ye walk what you want to see what you saw today. Now, maybe won't be on the khaki one under khaki one. One way to them, one way to them, one way to them. Your fry, or Queen Macus with a garden. The my prayers last year. Your prayer top man. Come and come out and say, oh, yes, I try and say, the baby now, what is a one boy there? Your fry and mine, Pina. One could do, when you walk, one my age, one boy and my baby. In fact, you bet your workers are for speakers. Yeah, and then I come like that. Why to feel what I know, what's going on? One of them, where has a mouth for one of the trust. No, I can't say about what we meant. Yeah, better. If we have a tobacco here, I'll put your rockets at you. Then now, if what you want, who got to? Your frat obeys some Kadanka, doesn't know. Actually, you put behind the massive behind. What's what covered? Now, on what? Ma, Zebra piano, on the may you so an Indian like the a few months or so much in the class of no care could see weed. The book of fair draw up or no point. I'll pay now to the floor. You're probably a family. Probably what will wait them, but you're good. You're good. Pa, thank you very much. Maurice? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nana Oberkesi Abba. At this juncture, I'll introduce Tufuhim of Atonkwa traditional area, Nana Kwame Nakra, to take the podium. Please, with a round of applause, let's welcome him.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Nana Oberkesi. Greetings, welcome everyone. Nana Ejukwa, Nana Chitwa, all of the guest participants. I am so happy to see you here today. We have had some significant technical problems today with computer connectivity, working instruments, so we've had to make a bunch of changes. So I'm hopeful that it will all go well at this juncture. And as I mentioned earlier, I have been working on this presentation for some time. So it's been incorporated into this year's Craig Organizational Black History Month. But you will be the first ones to see this, and you can critique it and help refine, develop, or change. We're also here today, and we have a unique opportunity to celebrate one of our Atonkwa students of the village school that has gone on beyond high school, and she's in catering service and apprenticeship, and this is her first ever gig to serve us. It's also her birthday today, so I'm going to start off her little birthday celebration with leaving some money here on the table for her birthday present today. So restrooms, a little housekeeping, restrooms are right across from here, behind the wall with all the pictures. As I mentioned, I had some computer technical problems, so I had to go get a second computer, and I neglected to bring a power cord, so we may, during your break, we may have to switch to the other computer, which is charged up. So I'm going to try to go very fast to make sure that we cover all the things. We may have to shorten some aspects of what we're doing. So this is the lecture, the first lecture. It was originally designed to be done at University of Cape Coast. We were going to meet with their faculty, and it's been entitled The Case for Transformation. So as an attorney, I'm going to give an opening statement to let you know what we intend to prove here today. And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you will be the ones to render a verdict as to whether or not we have demonstrated sufficiently that there is a need for transformation. So that's the purpose of this. What I want to remind you with this slide, everything I'm saying is just the tip of an iceberg. You could go into all of these things that I'm going to bring up as evidence and supplement it and clarify for yourselves whether or not you think it's valid. I'm also particularly excited with my brother here that I know from Cape Coast Dungeon, and one of the tour guides, Elmina Dungeon. So the tour guides, as you know, at these two dungeons come in contact with lots of people. So they tell a narrative about the history of Ghana, the history of colonialism, the history of the slave trade, the history of all these things. So anything we can add to their narrative or make them rethink aspects of their narrative is going to be really helpful. At least I think so. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. I've given you a handout with this information on it already, so that'll save us a little time. That's my personal bio, but you have that on a piece of paper already, so I'm going to skip past that. I'm going to suggest, too, as part of my opening statement, that in psychology, in cases of mental illness or anticipated or suspected mental illness or dependency, addiction, we often gather people together to convince the individual that A, there are a lot of people that care about them, and B, they're concerned about them, and C, they want them to do something. Usually it's to go into treatment. So I would like you to think a little bit about this as an intervention. I'm trying to convince us that there are things that we need to do in order to improve. So it's kind of an intervention. Most of my emails carry a tagline that says the 10th man. But there's only one woman somewhere in the universe that has acknowledged that she understands what that means. Most people don't. So I brought this, and I'm hoping that this speaker is going to do what we want to share with you.
With most people is that they don't believe something can happen until it already has. It's not simply a key or weakness. It's basic human nature. How did you know? Gerald Lane. Wrote the self-defeating Jeremiah. I was employed at the UN back in 2010. Almost a few ripples sidelined your career. But you've parlayed those ripples into a self-righteous book and us for profit. How did Israel know? We intercepted a communique from the Indian general saying they were fighting the Rakshasa. Translation, zombies. Technically, undead. Jürgen Warmbaum, high-ranking official in the South, described as sober, efficient, not terribly imaginative. And yet, you build a wall because you read a communique that mentions the word zombie? Well, people like that, I'd be skeptical as well. In the 30s, Jews refused to believe they could be sent to concentration camps. In 72, we refused to fathom we'd be massacred in the Olympics. In the month before October 1973, we saw Arab troop movements, and we unanimously agreed they didn't pose a threat. Well, a month later, the Arab attack almost drove us into the sea. So we decided to make a change. Change? The 10th man. If 9 of us look at the same information and arrive at the exact same conclusion, it's the duty of the 10th man to disagree. No matter how improbable it may seem, the 10th man has to start thinking with the assumption that the other 9 are wrong. And you were the 10th man. Precisely. Since everyone assumed that this talk of zombies was cover for something else, I began my investigation with the assumption that when they said zombies, they meant zombies.
I don't know if the sound was too loud to get the gist of what they were saying. Is it clear? Yes. The concept? Well, let me review it again. I first heard this term in this movie. Is it working?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I first heard the concept in this movie, so I researched it. And what it comes down to is the Israelis, based upon history, have always been faced with circumstances, but the prevailing view was, don't worry about it. And every time that everybody was so convinced they were wrong. So after the Olympics, where the Israelis were killed during the Olympics, that we know that followed the Olympics, we saw this. Afterwards, according to the script in the film, they decided to make a change. And the change was that if 9 people all agreed to something, It's the responsibility of the 10th person to assume that all 9 are wrong, and then pursue an alternative view of that as if they were wrong, because they had 3 experiences where everybody agreed that everything was okay, and then there was a catastrophe, starting with Hitler. They assumed that the Germans are never going to do anything to us. They were wrong. They assumed that they were never going to have trouble at the 72 Olympics because that was the report, but they were wrong. So they made a decision that if 9 people in a group agree that everything is fine, the 10th person has to assume that they're all in error. So in this climate that we live, where we are inundated with information that's all designed to achieve a narrative, I have become the perpetual skeptic. I assume that they are telling us a bunch of lies. And so my job in my mind is to understand and try to follow and find what is another explanation for these things. Because we could all be wrong. And if nobody is assuming that we're wrong, we could just all be taken down the garden path thinking that everything is fine. So that's where that concept comes from. And that's where the 10th man, so I consider myself the 10th man. Whatever is told to me, I assume that is not true. So the case we're going to make, if we can, I'll try to expedite it. We'll have a brief history of before we ever knew them. I want to share some history with you before we ever knew these people that seem to have control over our minds, control over our lives, control over our economy, control over all our resources, control over everything. But there was a time before we knew these people. Then section 2 is we currently have an inside problem and an outside problem. And finally, Sankofa. So let's go. Here's 4,000 years of history before African people ever heard of anyone that was non-African. 4,000 years. So when you look at this, it's small, but you can see there's the first dynasty, second, third, fourth, fifth, 18th, 19th, 20th, 25th. What I've highlighted in red is what we now know today when we talk about Egypt. All the time before that, we know as Kemet. When it was the black land, it was Kemet. When it became the white land, because of invasions, it was changed to Egypt. So you can pursue that. So there's 3,000 years. Here's another 1,000 years AD, or as we refer to it as the Common Era. Ghana Empire, the old Ghana Empire was 700 to 1200. The Moors of Spain from 700 to 1400. The Benin Empire, the Mali Empire, all these empires we had after we met and encountered these people. We had empires. Mali Empire, Mansa Musa, all this we had. Right up to the present day. We're in 2022. These are all the dynasties that took place in Kemet. All the pyramid building dynasties, all the way up to finally the invasion of Caucasians that took over Egypt, took over Kemet and changed it to Egypt. But these are recent developments. So this is me in Kemet on a trip. And I put this here just to take this one point that Ivan Van Sertima told us. Now you think about this, that the pyramids were older to Jesus than Jesus is to us. Let that sink in. Jesus was more amazed by the pyramids because they were older than Jesus is to us today. I put this here just to show you some aspects of ancient African history. Here are the popes talking and discussing in front of the Black Madonna. They all knew that the Virgin Mary and the baby is an African story. That's always been known. We've been convinced that it has something to do with Christmas and holidays, and we think it's something else. But everybody knows that knows history knows that it was a different story. I also put this here because in the U.S. now, they're talking about the Oscars nominations and the awards for upcoming recognition of the great movies of yesterday or last year. But the Oscar award that they use is a copy of the ancient Kemetic symbol for arts and culture. The same one they're going to give these people in a little handheld trophy is a copy of our own ancient cultural tradition that they say we never did anything. So this is the impressions. I put this on the paper for you too. And by the way, anybody that wants any of these slides or this entire presentation, you get with me, let me know, and I'll figure a way to download it, send it to you in email or whatever. So you don't have to feel like we're not going to have it. But these are quotes that I've collected of what whites, Caucasians said when they first encountered African people. This is what they said. Powerful kingdom, beautiful sculpture, complex trade, tremendous wealth, centers of advanced learning, all are hallmarks of African civilization on the eve of exploitation. This was a commentary that said they're hardly living up to the notion of the dark continent, label given by Europeans, because the empires of Ghana, Mali, Songhai are some of the greatest the world has ever known. Timbuktu, arguably the world's oldest university, was the intellectual center of its age. On and on and on. This is what the people said themselves when they met our ancestors. That was their impression. So here we are, present day Africa and African people. After 500 years of experience with whites, which is only a recent event in history. That's coming after 4,000 years of not knowing them at all. Now we've had a small 500-year intermission, and we find ourselves totally confused, totally dominated. We can't remember anything, and we don't know what to do. So now we are in the period of post-Ma'afa, the great disruption, and post-colonialism, which you talk about a lot in the tours that you give. So here's where we are as diasporans. I want you to see this. We may not, the whole thing is 7 minutes.
So we have some of our people here who think then that slavery was back then and had nothing to do. It had nothing to do with them. Ladies and gentlemen, we've never escaped slavery. We still share the slave consciousness of our great-great-grandparents. We are of the same mind to a great extent that they were. We have not advanced beyond these people. How can I say that? I generally ask a series of questions. You say that slavery has nothing to do with you, and slavery was back there. And I ask you the question then, what language do you speak? Mm-hmm. When did you learn that language? Was that the language African people were speaking when we were taken into slavery in America? In other words, the language we speak at this moment is what? A slave language. The language that our slave ancestors were forced to learn. And we still speak it, and you can still hear the pidgin, the Creole, and the other kinds of stuff.
in our language right at this moment that they had to go through. That language, with its words defined by history and by experience, is the language we use today to guide our behavior. It's the language we use today to talk to ourselves. It's the language we use today to learn about ourselves and to learn about the world. It's the language today we use to try to understand ourselves. Is there no wonder then that we are still confused? So we have not escaped slavery because we are still using a slave language and we speak the language of slaves. What kind of food do you eat? You say soul food? Was that the food of African people? Slave food. The food that we find most satisfying, the food that we find that sticks to our ribs, the food that we call down home, a food that we learn to eat in the quarters. And yet we dare say that we have escaped slavery, that we have nothing to do with those people back there, that was back there. When our whole very social life and social relationships, our very definition of ourselves as a people, our very attempt to commune with ourselves is mediated by the food of slaves. Understand what I'm trying to get at? And how can you say that you exist in a different consciousness from another people? What kind of uniforms are we wearing? Huh? What kind of clothes are we wearing? Were these the clothes of African people? Huh? This is what we got to look at. Yes. What is this to say then that we've escaped slavery? What kind of names do we respond to? Yes. Yes. Tamikas and all these other things we got going out here. What kind of names do we identify with? Why is it that African names sound strange to us now as a people, and yet we dare say that we have a different consciousness from our great slave grandparents? How can we say that? We are still of the same consciousness, and we are still in the same position because we are still servants of the white man. And our reason for being in America is to serve white folk and to generate wealth for them. And there has been no change at all in terms of our relationship to these people. The values that we pursue are slave values and the values of service. The social relations that we create and interact with were built and developed during the periods of slavery. We have not escaped it at all. But it is time for us to change the slave consciousness, this consciousness of servitude that is still too much with us today. And ultimately, we ask the question that's closest to home for a lot of people. When we claim that we've escaped slavery, and the slavery was something back there, which has nothing to do with us today. And then I ask you the question, what kind of God do you worship? What's the name of it? Who taught you to praise him? Was this the God you were praying to before you were brought to these shores? Was this the religion you had before you were brought to these shores? Can you name one African God? How can you then, who define yourself, the very essence of yourself and the very essence of your soul, and organize the very nature of your life here on earth, based on a God handed to us by a slave master, claim that you have no slave consciousness and are not related to slavery? In other words, then, ladies and gentlemen, we are not Africans. All right. We are possessed by spirits and demons. We have let another people's spirit take possession of our bodies and take possession of our minds. When we speak, it is not with our African voice. It is with the voice of that demonic presence that uses our lips to speak its own language. Yes. Yes, and we have to recognize this. We are possessed. And if we are to transform ourselves and to transform the nature of our relationship with those who are our masters, we must engage in an exorcism and clear the devils out of our minds.
We don't have time to debrief on this, but you should get the idea. You should get the idea. Is this on? Yes. Okay. Now, this was designed to be an interactive workshop. So I responded to, or I thought about, when I encounter Ghanaians, most of the time they refer to me, especially if I don't know them, as Ubruni. So my comeback to them is this. This was Amos Wilson, and these were the questions that he covered just now. So I have those there. But it applies to post-colonials too. You have this definition of cultural imperialism on that sheet. It's printed small, but I won't go into this. So my point is that Ghanaians and all other Africans that have been colonized are subject to the same commentary that Dr. Wilson just gave related to Africans in the diaspora now. So when people refer to me as Bruni, I say, well, what is Ghana's national language? English, right? That's an Obruni language. It's not an African language, that's an Obruni language. What is Ghana's professional dress? It's Obruni dress. Why do so many Ghanaians have colonial names? This is an Obruni practice. What is the foundation of Ghana's governance structure? Executive, legislative, judicial, all Obruni. What's the foundation of Ghana's education system? All Obruni. Why do Ghanaians prefer anything from the outside? Did it go on?
It's there.
So our link went on? Where did this come from?
It's come on.
I don't know what happened. So I don't know if this is on your list. Why are Ghanaians' aspirations the same as those of the West? Whatever Ghanaians say they want, it's all Western. It's all Western. Why do Ghanaians observe so many non-traditional Ghanaian celebrations? Valentine's Day, Sweetest Day, all this stuff. That's all Obruni stuff. So my conclusion to the person that calls me Obruni, I say, you're more Obruni than me.
Well,
So these things have to be looked at. This is the inside problem. These are the problems that we have now as a result of our encounter in 500 years of experience with these people. It's our responsibility to deal with these things. So that's the inside problem that we have. What they left us with, we don't know how much of an impediment it is to our own progress because we believe these things. Amos, that's not a Ghanaian name.
It's a Brony name.
It's Obruni name. So we got to purge the Obruni first before we can be ourselves. All of us. So that was designed, if we were in chieftaincy development or development of African people, this would be something that we do in a workshop and ask ourselves, why do we do these things? Someone has convinced us to do things that are contrary to our nature, contrary to our culture, and contrary to our interests. And we go around saying, I really want to get that done. I really want to get that perfect. So I'll be perfectly Obruni. Not just on my way to Obruni, I'll be 5-star Obruni. So that's the inside problem. Then there's an outside problem. Because in our desire to be Obruni, we assume that there's no outside problem. All we have to do is get better at being Obruni.
Yeah, because there is a policy of the American government. It's called the Kissinger Report, which was produced in the mid-70s when Henry Kissinger was involved with the government. And it explicitly states, which to this day, it remains the official policy of the American government. It has not changed. It may not be implemented by Trump, but it remains the same. That the purpose of the foreign policy in Africa was to reduce the population. So to give aid to countries in Africa, not clean water and schooling and things like that, but contraception and abortion, in order to shrink the population of Africa, because they have great mineral resources there.
That sounds diabolical.
Yes.
That sounds like something conceived in the mind of Margaret Sanger.
Definitely. And so at the time, Kissinger and those involved with the Carter administration wanted to shrink the population, make sure that the Africans do not develop and do not use the resources for themselves, because we in the States, we need them. There's a concerted effort of foreign powers to control the population of Africa. Africa is a huge continent, could feed 1,000 more people, but the policies of the West, especially in Europe. For example, between 1990 and the year 2000, the United States, Canada, and Europe contributed about $6 billion in contraceptives, not to help the people, not to give clean water, clean food. That is
not to fight malaria, for example.
No, perish the thought, never. Let them die. That's the whole idea. So in our work in Nature Line, we denounce this reality to make the Africans aware that they have to defend themselves against the influence of foreign powers.
Is it just the United States, or do you believe that China is also playing a role in jockeying for the resources of Africa?
China is playing a major role because China is buying property in Africa. For example, in Mozambique, which is a Portuguese-speaking language country, when Portugal was in charge of Mozambique, they used to export rice. Now they are importing rice from China because they cannot produce. The socialism has wrecked the production of rice. And the Chinese come and buy farms. So about almost a third of Mozambique belongs to China. So I was in other countries of Africa, the same reality in South Africa. The Chinese are buying property, buying land in Africa. So and they send their own workers, the Chinese workers. They don't employ people of the place. They send their own workers to populate and to live in the place.
Did you like or hate what you had? Let us know in the comments below.
We don't have time to follow up and discuss these things the way we would if we had a full day workshop to really digest what's being said. Now, I got 3 short clips, because I don't want you to think that I just have these ideas. I don't want you to think that I just had conjured up some ideas in my mind. But I want you to hear what the people on the outside are thinking about us. We need to know that, because there's an outside problem.
Hey, black people, this is just for you, because this guy's admitting to the fact that governments are trying to exterminate you.
Where does any synthetic molecule serve the living?
They don't.
Right.
I mean, none.
And am I right in suggesting that a medicine, by definition, is something which contains synthetic molecules, something that is registered, patented, and put into the market as a medicine?
Absolutely.
Right. So what I'm learning from you, Dr. Young, is that a quadrillion-dollar enterprise is at work amongst us, decimating, culling the human family.
Intentionally.
Intentionally, using synthetic molecules which by design are cancer, AIDS, all of the above men could dream of.
Yes, for the purpose of sterilization and population control. There's too many people on the planet we need to get rid of. In the words of Bill Gates, at least 3 billion people need to die. So we'll just start off in Africa. We'll start doing our research there, and we'll eliminate most of the Africans because they're deplorable. They're worthless. They're not part of this world economy. So they have their rights taken away, and they're suppressed and they're experimented.
And the multilateral agencies and the health and regulatory so-called authorities and agencies appear in the main to have become weaponized and appear, I again use the word appear advisedly, we're not casting judgments here, we're taking depositions, listening to expert testimonies, appear to be weaponized and appear to be working in collusion against the living men and women of the soil. Is that a fair statement?
It is. It's not a bacterial war. It's a systemic poisoning war, and they're using chemical warfare against all of us.
Again, we don't have time to go into it, but I just want you to be aware.
The Middle East is fucked. We should know we fucked it. 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies are in sub-Saharan Africa. Countries rich in mineral wealth. Coltan for our computers, cobalt for our batteries, phosphates for our agriculture, nuclear ore for our power. These are the things, gentlemen, that the wars of the next 20, 30 years will be fought over. A huge deposit of cobalt was discovered in Mali just over 2 years ago. Back then, we approached the Malian government about mining rights. They told us that those rights were going to the Chinese. So we set about to create the conditions to make sure that wouldn't happen. Just last week, one of our Australian subsidiaries, thank you, Lachlan, secured those rights. Our pilot project in Mali hit a few bumps, but I'm delighted to report that it worked. And if it can work there, there's no reason it can't work in other mineral-rich countries across Africa. We create the chaos, and then we move in and capitalize on that chaos. We're looking at the long term here, gentlemen. Rates of return that will make Iraq and Afghanistan look like chicken feed.
Last one, I think we're coming up on a break and we can check our.
Why don't we blow the system up? I mean, obviously, we can't just turn off the spigot on the system we have and then say, hey, everyone in the world should get this new vaccine. We haven't given it to anyone yet. But there must be some way that we grow vaccines mostly in eggs the way we did in 1947.
In order to make the transition from getting out of the tried and true egg growing, which we know gives us results that can be, beneficial. I mean, we've done well with that, to something that has to be much better. You have to prove that this works. And then you got to go through all of the clinical trials, phase 1s, phase 2s, phase 3, and then show that this particular product is going to be good over a period of years. That alone, if it works perfectly, is going to take a decade.
There might be a need or even an urgent call for an entity of excitement out there that's completely disruptive, that's not beholden to bureaucratic strings and processes.
So we really do have a problem of how the world perceives influenza, and it's going to be very difficult to change that unless you do it from within and say, I don't care what your perception is, we're going to address the problem in a disruptive way and in an iterative way, because you do need both.
But it is not too crazy to think that an outbreak of a novel avian virus could occur in China somewhere. We could get the RNA sequence from that, beam it to a number of regional centers, if not local, if not even in your home at some point, and print those vaccines on the patch and self-administer.
It's hard to misinterpret what's being said here. They're essentially outlining the pandemic. Everything we've seen.
Okay, we're up to our break. So let's take a 10-minute break. We can check to see about the battery power and whether we can get the other computer. So we can move this out of the way so Abigail can get food too. So let's see, we can check to see what's the status of our battery. Oh, the next thing I really got. The next thing.